On the afternoon of July 22nd, 2013, the air in Bailongqiao town felt unusually heavy. Not because of the heat. Zhejiang summers are always oppressive, humid, slow, suffocating in their own quiet way. By midday, the asphalt along National Highway 330 shimmered under the sun. Trucks passed at steady intervals. Motorcycles cut through side roads. Construction debris lay piled near an empty lot just south of the highway. Broken bricks, discarded tiles, dust-coated concrete. Nothing about the scene demanded attention, until the smell began to spread. At first it was faint, something sour drifting across dry soil. The kind of odor that makes you wrinkle your nose but keep walking. But as the afternoon wore on, it thickened. It clung to the air. It did not move with the wind. It settled. A woman tending to sesame plants across the lot noticed it before anyone else truly registered it. She crossed the dirt path slowly, scanning the piles of rubble. Stray animals sometimes crawled into abandoned spaces. It wouldn't be unusual, but the smell was wrong. Near the center of the lot, a cluster of cement bricks appeared stacked in a way that didn't quite match the randomness of the surrounding debris. They were arranged, not dumped. A few uprooted sesame stalks had been thrown loosely over the top, as if someone had tried to soften the outline. There was no visible blood, no disturbance in the soil, no obvious sign of violence, just structure where there should have been chaos. When the bricks were moved aside, the first thing visible through a narrow gap was black. Not trash bags, not construction material. A suitcase. It was large, modern, glossy. Its plastic handle still wrapped in factory film. A retail tag hung from the zipper. If placed under the fluorescent lights of a department store, it would have looked brand new. Because it was. Police arrived within minutes of the call. The lot was sealed off. Officers lifted the remaining bricks one by one, revealing the suitcase in full. It lay slightly tilted in a shallow depression in the dirt, as though it had been placed there with care, not dropped in haste. The zipper was not locked. There was no combination set. When it was opened, the smell intensified instantly, overwhelming the summer heat. Officers stepped back. Even those accustomed to difficult scenes found themselves pausing. Inside, tightly compressed into a space never meant to hold a human body, was a young woman. She had been wrapped in orange plastic material, the kind commonly used as a table covering. A black garbage bag covered her head. There were no identifying documents, no phone, no jewelry of distinction, only absence. Forensic examination would later estimate her age to be in her mid-20s. Approximately 165 centimeters tall, around 52 kilograms. Cause of death, mechanical asphyxiation. Time of death, roughly 15 to 20 days earlier. For more than 2 weeks, this suitcase had rested beneath bricks less than 50 meters from a national highway where vehicles passed daily. No one noticed, and yet something about the scene felt incomplete. The suitcase was pristine. Its exterior shell showed no scratches. The tag remained intact. The interior lining was unmarked except for what it now contained. But when investigators flipped it over, a detail emerged that did not align with the rest. The wheels were worn, not lightly scuffed, worn. The plastic along the edges showed abrasion consistent with extended contact against pavement. Fine gray dust had settled into the grooves. The pattern suggested distance, not storage. A brand new suitcase, used extensively. That contradiction lingered in the minds of investigators long after the body was transported for autopsy. Whoever placed it there had not simply discarded it, they had transported it. Without a vehicle, perhaps. The empty lot was not remote. It was not hidden deep in forest or mountain terrain. It was exposed, visible from certain angles of the highway. During daylight, it offered little concealment. If someone had access to a car, there were far more isolated locations within a short drive. But this was chosen, which raised an uncomfortable possibility. The person who left the suitcase may have walked. If so, how far? That question would come later. For now, the investigation began with something even more fundamental. Not who did this, but who is she? There were no missing person reports in Bailongqiao matching her description. No family members calling local stations. No friends searching door to door. No social media alerts circulating her face. In a town dense with migrant workers, people arriving from provinces across China seeking temporary work, anonymity was common. Rental rooms turned over monthly. Names were registered, but lives remained largely invisible. It is possible to live among thousands and still leave no trace when you disappear. Her fingerprints were entered into the national database. No match. DNA uploaded. No match. Her clothing, a simple white dress and black stockings found inside the suitcase, were widely available items sold in markets across multiple provinces. Nothing distinct, nothing personal. The only object that seemed to speak at all was the suitcase itself, and even that remained silent. As evening approached, the lot returned to stillness. The bricks lay scattered again, no longer arranged with intention. The heat began to fade, replaced by the softer hum of night traffic along Highway 330. Somewhere, perhaps within walking distance, someone knew this woman, or knew what had happened in a room where voices once rose and then stopped. For now, she existed only as a body without a name, in a suitcase that had traveled farther than it should have, in cases without witnesses, without cameras, without confession. Identity becomes everything. Before investigators could ask who killed her, they had to answer something more fragile. Who had lost her? The autopsy confirmed what the scene could not. She was young, likely between 22 and 27 years old. No defensive wounds significant enough to suggest prolonged struggle. Cause of death? Mechanical asphyxiation. The estimated time of death placed her final moments somewhere in early July, nearly 3 weeks before she was found. 3 weeks of silence. Inside her stomach, forensic technicians noted an unusual detail: a substantial amount of dried chili residue. Not the mild seasoning typical of Eastern Zhejiang cuisine. This was the kind of spice more commonly associated with provinces further southwest: Sichuan, Guizhou, Hunan, Yunnan. It was a small clue, but small clues matter when nothing else exists. Bailongqiao was not an isolated farming village. It was a migrant hub, a place where factory workers, warehouse laborers, and construction crews from across China rented cramped rooms and stayed for months or years at a time. People arrived quietly. They left quietly. Sometimes they left without telling anyone. The absence of a missing person report locally did not mean she wasn't missed. It only meant the person looking for her might not know where to begin. Police issued public notices throughout Jinhua. Posters displayed a reconstructed image of her clothing: a white dress, black stockings, fitted onto a mannequin to approximate how she might have looked alive. The reward ranged from 20,000 to 50,000 RMB for credible information. Within days, more than 100 calls came in. Each one carried a tremor of hope. My daughter hasn't answered her phone. My co-worker disappeared last week. My neighbor moved out suddenly. Every name was documented, every claim followed, and every single one was eliminated. Some had simply returned home without notice. Some had changed jobs. Some had reconciled with estranged partners. A few were intentionally avoiding debt. One lead seemed promising at first. A jewelry shop owner recognized the outfit described in the police notice. A young woman, a regular customer known locally as Luo Xia, originally from Sichuan, had recently failed to collect a custom piece she ordered. Her phone was unreachable. The physical description aligned. Investigators prepared for the possibility of confirmation. But when officers arrived at the registered home address in her province, they found her standing at the doorway, alive, confused, unaware that she had nearly become someone else's ending. The call was logged. Another false start. The woman in the suitcase remained unnamed. Days passed, then more days. At the forensic lab, her body was cataloged clinically. Measurements, tissue samples, dental structure, everything reduced to data points. She was assigned an internal reference number. Sterile, numeric, efficient. But somewhere, beyond the lab walls, she had once existed as something else. She had spoken in someone's dialect. She had eaten spicy food recently, perhaps shared at a table with someone she trusted. She had boarded a bus or train to arrive in Jinhua. She did not appear homeless. Her clothing was clean, her hair dyed, maintained. She had a life trajectory that led her directly into a suitcase. investigators widened the scope beyond Zhejiang province. Missing persons databases from southwestern regions were cross-checked manually. It was labor-intensive. Migrant registration systems in 2013 were not fully integrated nationwide. People moved frequently without updating official records. It is surprisingly easy to vanish between provinces. The case began to shift in tone internally. Without identity, the investigation felt suspended. Every clue circled back to absence. Officers could analyze fibers, plastic wrapping, brick placement, but motive requires relationship, and relationship requires a name. Then came a realization that changed the direction subtly but decisively. If she had traveled to Jinhua recently, someone might have expected her arrival. Transportation logs were reviewed, not individual tickets, but patterns. Guest houses were questioned, rental listings checked for short-term stays. Online chat platforms began to enter the conversation. In 2013, QQ was one of the dominant social messaging platforms in China. It was common for migrant workers to meet through online chat rooms, sometimes for friendship, sometimes for romance, sometimes for financial arrangements built on half-truths. Officers began to consider a possibility. What if she had come to Jinhua to meet someone? Not a relative, not an employer, but a man she only knew through a screen. That theory reframed everything. It would explain the lack of local connections. It would explain the absence of missing person reports within the immediate area. It would explain why no one in Balongqiao recognized her face. If she arrived alone, expecting something, and something went wrong, there would be no one nearby to ask questions. Still, at this stage, it was only hypothesis. Weeks after the body's discovery, investigators finally confirmed her real identity through cross-provincial tracing, a 22-year-old woman from Guizhou, married, mother of one child. She had previously worked in Shanghai before recent movements became unclear. The name she used online was not her legal name. She had been living under an alias. That detail complicated the narrative further. She was not simply a victim of circumstance. She too had constructed a version of herself that did not entirely match reality. Her online persona described her as single, vulnerable, in need of support. Messages retrieved later would show emotional appeals, stories of illness, hardship, loneliness. But none of that justified what happened next. Her deception, if it was deception, ended with confrontation. And somewhere in Balongqiao, during the first week of July, that confrontation had escalated beyond words. By the time investigators confirmed her identity, another thread had already begun tightening. One that did not begin with her, but with the suitcase. A suitcase discontinued months earlier. A store that remembered a customer measuring the interior carefully, and a man who walked away with it on foot. The question was no longer just who she was. It was becoming. Who expected her arrival? Long before investigators knew her real name, they had already begun listening to something else. The suitcase. It was not custom-made, not rare, not imported. At first glance, it appeared ordinary. A mass-produced hard-shell travel case sold in department stores across China. But ordinary objects leave records. The brand was identified quickly. Sales data was requested from the regional distributor. What seemed insignificant at first turned out to matter. This specific large-size model had been discontinued in December 2012. Production had stopped months earlier. By July 2013, only leftover inventory remained in circulation. That detail narrowed the search dramatically. Within Jinhua's distribution network, only one retailer in Balongqiao still had unsold stock of this exact size and color. A modest luggage shop near a side street. The kind of store people walk past without noticing. Officers brought a photo of the suitcase recovered from the lot. The shop owner recognized it almost immediately. He didn't remember every customer, but he remembered this one because of what he asked. On the morning of July 4th, just days after the estimated time of death, a man around 30 years old entered the store. Average height, accent not clearly local. He did not browse casually. He walked directly to the largest suitcase available and asked to see it open. Then he requested a measuring tape, not to check airline dimensions, but to measure the interior space carefully, length, width, depth. The shop owner had laughed lightly at the time, asking what he planned to pack inside that required such precision. The man replied he needed to ship a computer back to his hometown. It sounded plausible, but most electronic shipments use courier packaging, not personal luggage. And when investigators later checked with logistics companies in the area, no such shipment was recorded. The explanation dissolved under scrutiny. Sales records confirmed the purchase. 200 RMB cash payment, July 4th, 10 a.m. The timing aligned uncomfortably well with the forensic estimate of death in early July. CCTV footage from the shop was retrieved quickly, before automatic overwrite could erase it. The video quality was grainy, typical of small retail systems in 2013. The man's face was partially visible, but not sharp enough for immediate identification. He carried no vehicle keys in hand. When he exited the shop, he rolled the suitcase behind him. Empty, light. He walked. Cameras from nearby streets were collected. For several intersections, he appeared again. Moving steadily, phone pressed to his ear at one point. Then as he turned down a narrower side road, the footage ended. No more cameras covered that stretch. He did not reappear driving away. He did not load the suitcase into a car. He simply vanished beyond the blind spots of the city's limited surveillance network. But something else from the suitcase demanded closer inspection. When forensic technicians examined its underside more carefully, they documented significant abrasion on both wheels. Not cosmetic scratches, not transport scuffs from factory handling. These were consistent wear patterns, the kind caused by sustained friction over pavement. The contradiction sharpened. The suitcase was new, tags intact, lock unused, yet the wheels suggested distance. If the suitcase had been placed into a car shortly after purchase, wheel wear would be minimal. If stored indoors, nearly non-existent. But this one had been dragged. Investigators began asking a question that seemed almost too simple. How far had it traveled? The empty lot where the body was found was not ideal for concealment. It lay less than 50 meters from National Highway 330. Vehicles passed regularly. During daylight, the site was visible from certain angles. If the perpetrator owned a car, more remote locations were easily accessible within minutes. Mountains, forested outskirts, abandoned industrial sites. Instead, the body was hidden within walking distance of residential zones, which suggested something uncomfortable. Perhaps there was no vehicle, or perhaps using one felt riskier. Either way, if the suitcase had been dragged on foot, distance could be estimated. And distance meant geography. Geography meant narrowing. Before any suspect was named, before any door was knocked on, investigators purchased an identical suitcase. They filled it with 52 kilograms of weight, matching the victim's body mass, and they returned to the lot. Under similar pavement conditions, an officer began pulling it across the road. The sound of plastic wheels against asphalt echoed faintly, rhythmic, repetitive, not loud enough to draw alarm during daytime traffic, but noticeable in quiet hours. Every 100 meters, they stopped, photographed, compared wheel abrasion patterns, measured depth of wear. The results were consistent. After approximately 1.3 kilometers, the test suitcase's wheels displayed wear nearly identical to the recovered one. It was not an approximation, it was a match, which meant that on some night in early July, someone had dragged over 50 kilograms of concealed human weight for more than a kilometer through Bailongqiao's streets. Not running, not driving, walking. That distance created a circle, a 1.5-kilometer radius drawn around the dump site. Within that circle were rental compounds, factory dormitories, small businesses, informal housing blocks, hundreds of transient lives. If the starting point of the journey lay within that circle, then the first crime scene, the actual killing, was likely still there, hidden behind a closed door. The investigation shifted from abstract to intimate. Officers divided the area into sectors, 11 sections. Door-to-door inquiries began. Landlords were questioned about tenants who had recently left abruptly. Employers were asked about workers who stopped showing up after early July. Patterns began to form. One name surfaced quietly at first, not as an accusation, but as an absence. A tenant who had disappeared, a worker who had not collected his wages, a phone that no longer connected. But at this moment in the investigation, that name was just another thread. Not yet the center. The center was still the suitcase, and the 1.3 kilometers it had silently recorded. Once the radius was drawn, the case changed shape. Up until that point, the investigation had been searching outward, across provinces, across databases, across identities. Now it turned inward, a circle 1.5 kilometers wide, centered on the vacant lot near National Highway 330. Inside that circle were narrow alleyways lined with rental housing, small factories with rotating labor shifts, informal dormitories stacked floor above floor, convenience stores, internet cafes, hardware stalls, transient lives layered tightly together. If the suitcase had been dragged approximately 1.3 kilometers, then the starting point, the true crime scene, likely sat somewhere within walking distance. The search became methodical. The area was divided into 11 sectors. Teams moved door to door, landlord to landlord. They asked simple questions. Had any tenant moved out abruptly in early July? Had anyone left without collecting wages? Had any room required unusual cleaning? Had any arguments been overheard? Most answers were predictable. Migrant communities are fluid. People leave without notice. Workers change factories frequently. Disputes happen, but absence can be louder than presence. In Sector 8, a landlord mentioned a tenant who had not returned for several days, a young man in his mid-20s. Quiet, paid rent monthly, owed 100 RMB before disappearing. He had not come back to collect his salary either, though payday had passed. His name, Liang Kai. At this stage, it was not yet an accusation, just a name attached to a vacancy. Police visited the factory where he worked. Human Resources confirmed he had stopped reporting to work shortly after July 4th. Calls to his phone went unanswered. He had not resigned formally. The timeline aligned uncomfortably well with the forensic window of death. Investigators requested access to his rental room. The building was typical of the area. Concrete walls, narrow stairwell, thin doors separating lives by only centimeters. Inside his room, a single bed, a desk with a computer, basic kitchenware, a standing fan. Nothing appeared overtly violent, no broken furniture, no visible bloodstains. But violence does not always leave dramatic scenes. In the drawer of the desk, officers found a folded plastic table covering, orange in color. Its material matched the wrapping recovered inside the suitcase. On a shelf nearby were several unused black garbage bags. Same size, same thickness as the one placed over the victim's head. Individually, these items were ordinary household objects. Together, they began to align. The mattress was lifted. On its underside, faint brownish stains had seeped into the fabric, nearly invisible unless examined closely. Samples were collected immediately. The room was sealed pending forensic analysis. When laboratory results returned, the match was conclusive. DNA from the mattress stains matched the DNA profile of the unidentified woman from the suitcase. The first crime scene had been found. It was not in a forest, not in an abandoned building. It was here, in a rented room less than 1.3 kilometers from where the body was concealed. The circle had closed. Liang Kai was no longer simply a missing tenant. He became the primary suspect in a homicide investigation. A national alert was issued. His identification circulated across provinces. Transportation records were reviewed. Financial transactions monitored. 8 days after the suitcase had been opened in the empty lot, he was located in Shangqiu, Henan province. He did not resist arrest. There was no dramatic chase, no violent standoff. By the time officers placed him in custody, the logic of the case had already narrowed around him. The suitcase, the store purchase, the walking route, the rental room, the DNA. Each element alone might have left room for doubt. Together, they formed a sequence. In the interrogation room back in Jinhua, the evidence was laid out piece by piece. The orange plastic, the black trash bags, the mattress stain, the 1.3 kilometer reconstruction. At some point during the presentation, Liang Kai lowered his head. Silence stretched across the metal table. The investigative phase, the search for location, for distance, for physical truth, had reached its conclusion. What remained now was motive, and something more complicated than logistics, because this was not a robbery, not gang violence, not a random encounter. This was a meeting, a planned meeting between two people who had spoken before. The suitcase had carried more than a body. It had carried the collapse of something built online. In the interrogation room, there was no visible rage, no defiance, no performance. Liang Kai sat still, shoulders slightly hunched, hands resting on his knees. 26 years old, from Jilin province, a warehouse worker earning roughly 3,000 RMB a month. There was nothing in his employment record that suggested violence. No criminal history, no prior police contact. On paper, he was unremarkable. But online, he was someone else entirely. Weeks before the killing, he had been active on QQ, one of China's most popular messaging platforms at the time. There, behind a profile picture carefully chosen and words typed slowly enough to sound confident, he presented himself as a successful executive, annual income in the millions, ambitious, stable, looking for a serious relationship. It is easier to construct wealth in pixels than in reality. On the other side of the screen was a young woman using the name Chen Ling. She was 22, from Guizhou, married, a mother. But online, she described herself as single, vulnerable, financially strained, often ill. She spoke of hardship in ways that invited sympathy. In messages recovered later, she hinted at medical expenses, at needing support, at longing for someone reliable. Two people speaking from behind curated versions of themselves. Neither fully honest, neither fully transparent, and yet both participating willingly in the illusion. Their conversations grew intimate quickly. Liang Kai promised stability, promised care, promised shopping trips and medical checkups if she came to Jinhua. He spoke as though the future were secured by the salary he did not actually earn. On July the 2nd, 2013, she traveled to meet him. She arrived wearing a white dress. The first meeting must have carried a subtle shift in atmosphere. The moment when digital imagination confronts physical space. The room he rented was small, concrete walls, a single bed, no evidence of executive success, no symbols of wealth. But the meeting continued. They were intimate that evening, consensually. For a few hours, the illusion held. The following morning, reality began to intrude. She mentioned the promises again: shopping, medical visits, financial help. He hesitated, avoided specifics. There was no money, no plan, only delay. Voices rose. According to his later statement, she accused him of being a fraud, a liar, a man who pretended to be wealthy online to impress women. The words cut directly into the persona he had constructed. It was not just exposure, it was humiliation. For someone whose digital identity compensated for real-world inadequacy, being seen clearly and dismissed can feel catastrophic. The argument intensified. Objects were knocked over. In the narrow confines of the rented room, there was nowhere for anger to disperse. He moved toward her. He would later describe it as an attempt to silence the shouting, to stop the insults, to regain control of the situation. His hands closed around her neck. At first, perhaps, it was pressure meant to intimidate, but anger alters perception. Time compresses, judgment fragments. When she stopped resisting, he did not immediately understand what had happened. Then the room grew quiet. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was practical. A body lay on the bed. The persona he had built online had collapsed. And now there was a new problem, one that required logistics, not emotion. His actions in the hours that followed were not impulsive. He sat, he thought, he removed her clothing, considered dismemberment, an idea he later admitted crossed his mind, but abandoned it. He did not have the psychological threshold to proceed that way. Instead, he identified a simpler solution: containment. On the morning of July 4th, he walked to the luggage shop and purchased the largest suitcase available. He measured its interior carefully, not for a computer, but for a body. He returned to the room, wrapped her in an orange plastic table covering, placed a black garbage bag over her head, put her clothing inside with her, wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. He cleaned the visible surfaces. He waited. At approximately 2 a.m., when foot traffic was minimal, he dragged the suitcase from the building, 52 kilograms inside. He walked 1.3 kilometers, past intersections, past shuttered storefronts, past residential windows. The sound of plastic wheels scraping against asphalt must have echoed softly in the early morning air. When he reached the vacant lot near National Highway 330, he set the suitcase down in a shallow depression. At first, it was too visible, so he returned to the pile of construction debris and carried bricks one by one, stacking them over it. He uprooted sesame plants nearby and placed them on top to soften the outline. Then he walked home. He slept. In the days that followed, he went to work normally. The psychological shift is perhaps the most unsettling part of the case. The strangulation itself may have occurred in a burst of emotional collapse, an explosion triggered by humiliation and ego rupture. But everything afterward was measured. He purchased tools, selected timing, considered concealment strategy, cleaned the scene, attempted to resume routine life. When news broke about the discovery of a body in a suitcase, he did not surrender immediately. He fled. During interrogation, when confronted with the forensic evidence, he did not deny the act. He described it as losing control, as acting in a moment of rage. But rage alone does not measure suitcase dimensions. Rage does not calculate 2 a.m. departure times. Rage does not clean. What emerged was not the profile of a predatory killer, nor of a career criminal. It was something quieter, a fragile self-image built on exaggeration, a fear of being exposed as inadequate, a confrontation that stripped away the illusion, and a man who could not tolerate what remained when the mask slipped. The suitcase was not purchased to travel. It was purchased to contain the collapse of identity. The trial did not take long. By January 2014, the evidence was already arranged in a sequence that required little interpretation. DNA from the mattress, the discontinued suitcase traced to a single shop, the CCTV footage of purchase, the 1.3-kilometer reconstruction, the confession. In court, the narrative unfolded in measured detail. There were no dramatic surprises left to reveal, no alternate suspect, no procedural error large enough to fracture the chain of proof. Liang Kai was convicted of intentional homicide. The sentence, death. On paper, the case closed cleanly, a beginning, a middle, an end. But closure in legal terms does not always resolve the psychological residue a case leaves behind, because this was not a crime born from financial desperation alone, nor jealousy, nor organized violence. It began with 2 carefully curated identities meeting in a rented room. Both of them had performed. He performed wealth. She performed vulnerability. Neither expected the performance to be audited in person. In the digital space where they met, identity was elastic. Income could be inflated. Marital status could be erased. Photos could be chosen to suggest a life more stable, more appealing, more desirable than reality. Online, Liang Kai was not a warehouse worker. He was a success story. Online, she was not a married mother navigating financial uncertainty. She was a woman waiting to be rescued. The problem was not deception alone. It was what happened when the deception collapsed. When humiliation enters a confined space, it behaves unpredictably. For individuals with fragile self-worth, exposure can feel existential. An insult is not merely criticism. It becomes confirmation of every private insecurity. If Liang Kai had simply been ignored, the illusion might have dissolved quietly. If she had simply left, perhaps the encounter would have ended in embarrassment rather than violence. But confrontation accelerates. Words spoken in anger often target the very thing a person is most desperate to protect. And in that small rented room, what shattered was not only a relationship, it was the identity he had constructed to escape his ordinary life. The suitcase, in a sense, was an attempt to restore control, contain the evidence, control the narrative, return to normal routine. He went to work after hiding the body. That detail unsettles more than the act itself, because it suggests compartmentalization, the ability to divide action from consequence, to carry groceries, clock into shifts, respond to casual conversation, while knowing that beneath bricks less than a kilometer away lay a secret he believed would remain undiscovered. But even calculated concealment leaves traces. Wheel abrasion, retail records, distance measured in plastic and asphalt. It was not a dramatic clue that solved the case. It was friction, the friction between a new suitcase and rough pavement. the friction between digital fantasy and physical reality, the friction between ego and exposure. If investigators had not noticed the wear on the wheels, the search radius may have remained too wide. If the model had not been discontinued months earlier, the purchase trail might have dissolved into hundreds of possibilities. If CCTV data had overwritten sooner, identification might have taken longer. Small details prevented disappearance. There is another question that lingers beneath the procedural facts. Was it truly a moment of uncontrolled rage? Or was it the product of something deeper? A long-standing insecurity masked by grandiosity. The strangulation may have lasted minutes, but the vulnerability that preceded it likely developed over years. Urban migration often produces a particular psychological tension. Individuals leave hometowns seeking opportunity. They arrive in cities where status is visible everywhere, in cars, clothing, apartments, salaries. When aspiration outpaces reality, performance becomes tempting. Digital platforms amplify that temptation. In online spaces, you can edit your worth. But once edited identities intersect with physical expectation, the margin for exposure narrows. This case does not suggest that online deception leads inevitably to violence. Millions fabricate small exaggeration without consequence. What it does suggest is that when identity becomes entirely dependent on illusion, its collapse can feel catastrophic to someone unprepared to tolerate shame. The woman in the suitcase was not defined solely by her alias, nor was Liang Kai defined solely by his lies. Both were more complicated than their online profiles. Yet the tragedy unfolded at the intersection of those profiles. Near National Highway 330, traffic continued to pass long after the bricks were cleared. Drivers likely never realized how close they had come to a concealed crime. The empty lot returned to its ordinary stillness. But for investigators, the memory of the wheels remained. A brand new suitcase that had traveled 1.3 kilometers under cover of darkness. Distance measurable, intent measurable, human fragility far less so. So the final question remains quieter than the verdict. If humiliation had not entered that room, if the performance had been allowed to fade instead of being confronted, would anyone have walked 1.3 kilometers that night? Or was the violence waiting long before the argument began? What do you believe? Was this the result of a sudden emotional collapse, or the exposure of a self-image too fragile to survive reality?